Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Triyani. I'm from 5F class. Here I will explain the material about genre analysis on reading passages. The following is a table of contents that will be discussed. First, definition of genre. Second, genre analysis. Third, genre category. Fourth, generic structure, and the term in generic structure. The first material will be definition of genre. Genre is a subject that discusses the grouping of text types. In its current application, attention to genres, or what we can call variety of text, has significantly increased, especially in analyzing discourse for both first language and foreign language teaching, especially in the process of teaching English for specific purpose. According to Anne Friedman, first, genre is an organizing concept for our cultural practice. Second, any field of genres constitutes a network of contrast according to a variety of parameters. Third, genre is place, occasion, function, behavior, and interactional structure. It is very rarely useful to think of it as a kind of text. Fourth, cultural competence involves knowing the appropriateness principle for any genre, knowing the kind of margin you have with it, being able to vary it, knowing how to shift from one to another, and how many factors would be involved in any such shift. Genre is really important in reading skill. It will affect the student's comprehension in reading skill because it provides the feature of a text to help the student identify a text. Understanding genre means that the student is easier to interpret a text because each genre has different social function, generic structure, and linguistic features. This characteristic is really useful for a reader to understanding a text because it explains how text is organized. According to Alderson, that having knowledge about organized text is as same as having knowledge about how the information is signaled and how changes of content might be marked, and it facilitates the reader to read. Genre is an abstraction term for a variety that is divided into a particular art or speech form according to the appropriate criteria for that form. In all types of art, genre is a categorization without clear boundaries. Genres are formed through conventions, and many works cross several genres by borrowing and combining conventions. The scope of the word genre is usually limited to terms in the arts and culture. Genre is a text type. Each genre has a different generic structure. The next material is genre analysis. Genre analysis is a process of looking at several samples of a particular genre to analyze their similarities and differences in terms of their proposed macro structure and language choice. Genre analysis is an analysis used to describe the purpose, characteristics of language and text patterns and directed at a basic framework. There are three of the approaches to genre analysis. First is Wallace approach. In this approach focuses on the move on and text analysis within a genre. The second is Australian system or functional systems method. In this approach focuses on the forms and function of language. And the third is New Rhetoric. This is focuses on the intention and effect of language. The next material is genre category. Genres in writing are distinguished in the categories of non-fiction and fiction. Nonfiction is a genre that contains writings that do not require imagination in this genre. The content of writing usually contains a narrative of scientific authorship, articles, tips and tricks, historical records. This is the example of nonfiction. One more. Nonfiction is a branch of literature which describes factual or real events. The first example or type is Almanac. It's a yearly publication that contains useful facts and statistics. And then autobiography. Autobiography is the story of a real person's life that is written by that person. And there are personal essays, a short piece which expresses your thoughts and opinions about a topic, usually in first person. I think, I feel, and then biography, the story of a real person's life written by another person. And there are magazines. It's a periodical that usually contains a miscellaneous collection of articles, stories, poems, and pictures and is directed at the general reading. And there is newspaper. It's a regular publication that gives information about current and events and other assorted articles. And the last is informational. Texts that provide facts about a variety of topics, sports, animals, science, story, careers, travel, geography, space, weather, etc. The next is fiction. Fiction is a genre that is usually a story that requires imagination in its processing. The following are the types of fiction genres are: the first is sci-fi. They are science and fiction. In sci-fi, the awakened world is a world that has concepts of technology and scientific science that do not necessarily exist in the real world. Example of sci-fi are the film Inception, the Sparrow books, and Back to the Future films. Second is horror. It's a type of genre whose story and plot are built in such a way that it is able to give a sense of horror to the reader or audience. Horror can be about subtle creatures that like to terrorize, but it can also contain about serial killers who give the impression of horror. But keep in mind that stories that have demons in them are not necessarily included in the horror genre. A story can only be said horror if it is able to give the impression of horror and terror for the reader. Example is The Exorcist film and It novels by Stephen King. The next is fantasy. It is a genre that has magical and supernatural elements, dabbling in a world that seems surreal but is actually very logical. Fantasy is a manifestation of a high level of creativity that demands the imagination, but also remains logical and rational. Example like Harry Potter, serial, and The Trials of Epilogue. Next is romance. It's a genre that actually elevates everyday life. In romance, there is an element of daily life that lately is called slice of life. Romance is said to have a characteristic where the fiction written in it reads so poetic and romantic that it is able to create a heartwarming atmosphere that results in the reader being able to enjoy its beauty. The part of life that everyone always feels is falling in love, seeing love and love. Example like Let the train pass, Carmilla sinking wonderfully. The next is adventure. Is an adventure-themed genre. An adventure doesn't have to wander to faraway place, but it can have an event capable of changing something, be it yourself or someone else. Adventure is an important event that happens in a person's life. There are mystery. It's not necessarily horror. Mystery is a story that is tells to make the reader feel curious throughout the story because many things are covered and uncovered one by one. The mystery story emphasizes the element of twist and requires a powerful trick to maintain its stability. A check of gun, red herring is often a technique used by mystery writers in writing stories of this genre. Example like Sherlock Holmes and Detective Conan. The next is humor. It is a genre that emphasizes the elements of comedy and parody. Humor puts more emphasis on the element of humor and aims to make the reader laugh and entertain it. Some writers use tricks such as using slang and line up sentences such as everyday speech that seems ungainly and likely. But actually, humor can also be a joke by still using literary words. Example, quote, but the also this fiction or non-fiction and sketch. The next is historical fiction. It's a genre of stories that has a setting in the real world but at different times, usually in the past. Writing this genre should not be arbitrary unless the author has another theory of the facts that have occurred. If you want to successfully write stories in this genre, a writer must have a very strong research. Example like the film of Fury and the book of My Name is Red novels. And the last is fan fiction. It is a story that is made as a tribute to something that has a copyright, aka something that already exists. Parsing from the meaning of the word fan is fans and fiction is fiction. Fan fiction can mean imagination of fans. So if you create a story based on your favorite boy band or animated movie and still use the word concepts, characters, and some aspects of the original story, it's called fan fiction. Example like Crash for Geno from NCT Dream and Crash Timothy Chalamet fan fiction. The next material is generic structure. Generic structure are a major part of genres. The function of generic structures is to tell the reader how the text was made. According to generic structures, analysis can make you more understanding about the management of genres. English is one of the languages that has many types of text. Each text has a generic structure. In general, generic structure is the structure or pattern of presentation in an English text. One of the important things to learn is to know the term generic structure. Generally, generic structure is systematic or flow of presentation of information contained in English. Each English text has a different generic structure. This is the term in generic structure. First is introduction. The pattern that first appears when you create a text review is introduction. There is issue, explain the issues that are being reviewed. There are explanation, contains a series of sequences of events from a process that is the topic of the text. There are general classification. The term is intended for a general review of the noun being listed. And general statement. Judging from its own meaning, the term expresses an opinion in general. And interpretation. In this last feature, a writing will appear about the user's impression when using the product. And then abstract. Summary of the story is usually in the form of unusual or odd events in the story to be confused. Their argument. Statements that support issue as well as unsupportive statements. And background event. Explain how an event is mentioned in the first paragraph, like newsworthy event. Newsworthy event contain an introduction or orientation about who, what, where, and when the event. Conclusion. This term is a part of the text in the form of the author's conclusions to the topic raised. Orientation. The term refers to the introduction in the text. The orientation. The author's final statement on the experience that has been done. It's usually an impression or impression. Thesis. Paragraph containing the author's statement on the matter being discussed. Description. This term is presented to complete the overall picture of the nouns already mentioned in the general classification. Event. This term denotes an event or event held in a text. And the last is evaluation. Evaluation given by the author of the work being discussed. Okay, alright, that's an explanation of the genre analysis on reading passages material. Thank you very much. I end. Nun wal kolami wa maisturun. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.